Thank you. I'd start with a disclaimer that my surfing abilities are well intended, but quite frankly, they're poor. Great. And again, thank you everyone for joining. It's a pleasure to have your attention. So today, I'd like to speak to you because I believe that we've all come together because we believe that our efforts are worth spending on helping the world transition to renewable energy, right? We've made that a focus of our lives. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Good, I found the right room. So that's definitely true for me, right? So I grew up in Portugal. I was surfing, I was sailing, I was in the water a lot, and it became quite evident that I wanted to do something that I thought was worthwhile. For that reason, when it's time to choose a degree without any big notion of, salaries, what you actually do, I decided to study marine biology and oceanography. So I went to Southampton in the UK, and that's what I did. My big learning from my degree was that I did not want to be a marine biologist. It turns out that, maybe 1 in 1,000 actually gets to save turtles or hug dolphins. It's very much about technical work in labs, and the only real career that you have is that of research. And so research is, as you know, often not really applied to the real world. So when I came back to Portugal, I was unemployed and unmotivated. I was unemployed for almost a year, so I ended up going to my tool set, and I thought, what do I know? And I was a reasonable sailor, and so I became a sailing coach. And that exposed me to leadership and to organizing small groups and motivating them to achieve big things. And that ended up being really interesting. And while I was doing this on weekends, in about 2 months later, I got my first job. And my job was at a place called WAVEC, which stands for Wave Energy Center. And I thought, all right, cool. I mean, this is applied. I can sink my teeth into this. So for the next 4 years, I worked 7 days a week. Plus holidays was to go with I ended up being the coach for the National Federation. So I went with the kids on international competitions. So I basically worked full on for 4 years with essentially no holidays. And I was incredibly happy. It was really good. But at some point, the work that I was doing during the week, I started working on several research projects, which are supposed to be more applied than pure science. And yet, I found that their translation into the number of megawatts being generated by renewable energy was really, really, really low, if not insignificant. So again, I found myself applying my efforts to something that wasn't giving the return or the impact that I wanted. So I had the privilege of being able to grab 3 of my best friends. We put some backpacks on and we went traveling for a year. And the big take-home message of this was an enormous sense of urgency. You see people that do not have the privilege of having options, right? People whose barriers to entry to have an impact or do what they want are huge. And suddenly coming from within the global 5%, I thought, I do not want to go down without at least giving one big shot at something worthwhile. So I actually came back to the same position in the same company, but with a completely different mindset. And I was working in the environmental department, and I started being really restless. And I had 2 or 3 business ideas out of the company that didn't get any traction. I started doing a number of entrepreneurial courses, and I found this really amazing tool, which is value, that you can actually generate something that somebody wants and is willing to pay for. And that generates a completely different scenario for traction. And then at some point, I had the light bulb idea for ProDrone, which is, I was working with an offshore demonstration project in Portugal that you might have heard of called WindFloat. It's an offshore floating wind turbine. And I wondered how the blades of the turbine were inspected. And I just made some calls and figured out that blades were inspected either through pictures from the ground, which has really bad resolution and takes a long time, which means the turbine has to be stopped for a while, or through rope work. Like seriously, a circus act of highly trained technicians hanging off ropes at 100 meters in the air looking for cracks on a blade. And so drones back in 2014 were not all the rage that they are today. And I thought that they could be an incredible tool. And so I built a business case around it. I built an engineering plan around it, and I went pitching. And the first place I pitched was Energy. And long story short, 4 months later, I'm sitting in an office with Yannick by myself with a 100,000 euro check to see if I could make this work. Now, I cannot write a line of code. I am not an engineer. I had nothing except good intentions and 100,000 euros. So that started my entrepreneurial journey, and it's been an absolute roller coaster ever since. We've been extremely close to exiting and to achieving really big investments, and that didn't go through. We've been probably 5 or 6 weeks away from disappearing. The last time was this summer. And somehow we get this, this breath of fresh air whenever we're almost gone and get the breath of life. So it's been a really big roller coaster and a lot of fun. And we just won now the SME Instruments Phase 2, which is this really competitive European grant, which is put directly into your company. You don't have to collaborate with anyone. It's like the best funding possible. And that's like 1.4 million euros of free money to continue to build our dream. And so this has sort of been all the decision making around this initial intention that we all share. And I'm sure this resonates with a lot of you, right? You're making your decisions and figuring out how best to engineer your availability to be able to have the highest amount of impact, right? So now I'd like to introduce a bit of a different perspective on this, right? And this perspective comes from a very soul realization, which is that within your whole life, there is one single resource that is finite, that you can never replenish, right? And I think most of you know what this is, right? And this is your time. Every single moment, including this one right now, you will never ever get back. And so if you look at things from this prism, what we're all doing in reality is trying to best apply our finite resource to try and help the world not be dependent on a finite resource and actually be able to live off renewable resources, right? This is the real equation. And this is how I have gradually over time started to look through this prism on how I make my decisions. And so from here, I'd like to go into some practical aspects of how exploring this concept has led me to look at my life and how I make decisions, and I hope perhaps there's a bit of a light bulb there for you as well. Time is a really interesting subject in itself, and I'm not going to go into the physical aspect of it. It's really interesting. There are dozens of, hundreds of videos on YouTube that you can delve into about how gravity and time are entangled, but even scientists and physicists are not entirely sure about what time is and how we can grasp it. So I want to discuss more practical things in our lives. And the first one is the fact that everything that has happened in the past and everything that will happen in the future will always happen in the present. And therefore, being as present in the present as we possibly can enables us to live a more fulfilled life. Now, this is a horrible time to be preaching this, right? We're living in a time where our attention span has never been more commoditized or monetized, right? Publicity, alerts, push notifications. Companies and governments are vying for your attention as much as possible, right? So your leeway to be able to focus on the things that are important for you has never been as challenging as today. Now, one way to look at this, more practical again, is that both the past and the future are really not that significant to the moment that we live today, right? The past has happened. The past is memories. It is solidified in the past, and there's nothing that we can do to change it. To carry with us the weight of the past is the equivalent of, Each time you're going on your journey and you stumble on a rock, you pick it up and you put it on your backpack and you keep walking. This brings weight for you today when there's absolutely no reason for it. And an excess of baggage from our past is what we today commonly call depression and leads to depression. So we have to find a way of not carrying it. The future is a figment of our imagination, right? We really like to claim when we get things right about how we predicted things in the future. But if you look at it from an objective point of view, the fact is you're almost never right. These are illusions that we create in our life, projections that very rarely influence our life today, except for bringing one thing into our life, which is anxiety, right? So carrying the weight of the past is depression. Worrying about a possible future that only exists in our head is anxiety. So really our goal to be able to be as present as possible and as effective as possible in our mission is to compress our attention span as much as possible into the present. All right? And so this is a spiritual, we can even call it, message that has been sent to us through multiple different lines of thought, right? Whether it be meditation or mindfulness that is really trendy right now, or even prayer, right? All these different thoughts, all these different lines try to help us live our lives as focused in the present moment and in what exactly we're doing as possible. And the benefits of this are well known. I mean, this is not shanti talk, right? We're talking about everything from health to sleep, to physical pain, to decision making, right? To being happy with our state of being. And this relates directly to us because if we believe we're on a mission, we also have the obligation of doing the maintenance on the vehicle that is doing the work that we want to be executed, which is ourselves. The second one that I want to speak to you about time has to do with our notion of time. And the first thing I want you to do is just take a moment to think what a day felt like when you were 5 years old. You remember that huge, massive adventure, never ending, of things upon things that happened during a day? Your notion of time as a child was completely different to the one that you have today. And if you speak to your parents or to your grandparents, you'll realize that everyone says that time only accelerates. It's as if our most precious resource is like sand slipping through our fingers ever faster, right? And we now start to understand why this happens. Some factors are biological. It's got to do with the refresh rate of your eyes and how you perceive information. But we also know that there's a second really important factor in this, which is new neurological connections that you create. The more that you create, the longer your experience of time, right? This explains why the 5-year-old, every 5-year-old thinks that the day is really long. They're puzzling out the world in real time, right? They have no idea what this class is going to be like. They have no idea how they're putting together all these concepts in real time. And it's their processing of this information and the novelty of the problems that they're facing that gives them this extended feeling of time. You can feel that today. If you drive down a new road for the very first time, it will feel 10 times longer than the second times you do it. And like Falco was saying when he was doing his 45-minute commute, after a few months, when he realized he was sitting at his desk and he didn't even remember the path that he'd done, those 45 minutes of his life had just been evaporated. So, if we can engineer our lives in a way where we're constantly challenged, where we're having new experiences, where we do not fall into repetitive routines, we're actually able to sustain and experience a longer life. So this sounded like a bit of all over the place, right? Now this is the time where I try and wrap everything up in a very real way for the way that we live our lives. So on one hand, we know that we can improve our quality of life and our attention and our ability to execute if we actually focus on the present moments. And on another hand, if we can put ourselves in situations that are novel and that challenge us, we can also extend our experience of life. And so, from my point of view, given my path and what I've done, I have to say that entrepreneurship has made me have to develop these two tools. On one hand, I've had to make the hardest decisions I've ever had as an entrepreneur. Just earlier this year, I had to fire one of the co-founders and one of my best friends. And so, this is a very difficult decision that I have to live with. This is something of my past that I have to release. I have huge expectations around me and the company and what we're supposed to achieve, projections for the future. I mean, when I speak to an investor, I give him a projection of how my company is going to evolve and how much I'm going to sell and how awesome I'm going to be. I can't let that anxiety cripple me in my decisions today. And on another hand, and this is obvious, I'm always facing new problems. Like, there are no 2 days the same in a startup. So the main point of my talk is to say that these are challenges for everyone, and specifically for people who have a purpose and a mission in their lives. And that entrepreneurship has been a way that I have found. It's taken me some years, but it has empowered me, but also forced me to look at these very crucial questions about our existence and how we live our lives. So perhaps an entrepreneurial experience is something that you might want to add to your travel along life, to be able to live really intensely and gather some of these lessons as well. So I wish everyone here the most profitable and useful and purposeful use of your time. And as far as I'm concerned, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to share this time with you. Thank you very much. Are there questions?
Yeah, do you have any questions? So at what point, I assume there has to be a catalyst for that kind of thinking. What was the catalyst for you?
Like most situations, a catalyst usually comes from a point of attrition, right? And during the entrepreneurial journey, it is often romanticized, but it is, especially in my situation, I think I have different problems, but one of the problems that I have is I'm really, from a responsibility perspective, a sole founder, which means that I have the privilege of deciding what my company is going to be like, and I don't really have to ask anyone about it, but the entire responsibility of that is also on my shoulders. So I don't get to share decisions at a very high level. And so there have been some really intense, dark periods, things that I would not wish upon anyone of, things, really difficult sleep, sometimes toxic environment inside the company that you build, and you ask yourself, I think I'm doing this for all the right reasons, and I'm putting as much effort as I can, and things are not going in a direction that is good. And so it's usually at the low points that you have to do some introspection about how you look at things. And there's a lot of wisdom around, and speaking to mentors and also understanding and studying a bit about these trains of thoughts has been fundamental, because at some point, and this is a terrible thing that you have as an entrepreneur, is often you have the imposter syndrome, which is like, imagine sitting with 100,000 euros and no idea how you're going to execute something with 100,000 euros. You feel like, I've duped everyone. Like, this is impossible. This is not supposed to be happening. And so you have these really conflicting feelings. And sometimes you just don't see a way out. So I have felt, not often, but I think 2 times, it's not worth it. Screw it, I'm out. And those moments are really, really enriching, because they force you to ask the hard questions.
Do you think you're going to feel that way again?
Absolutely, yeah. But what I'm trying to do is, if you think of the startup life, you think something of high frequency, right, and low period, right? It's like, it's one day you're freaking awesome, like incredible. Have a company, I'm paying salaries, I'm making new tech, I'm speaking at conferences, and the next day, like one of your drone crashes. And you're like, shit, everything's going to crap. I don't have money to pay salaries in 6 months. So my idea is not to eliminate this, but it's actually to smooth out the curve of my of anxiety and how I live it, right? I think pretty much that's what wisdom is, right? When you're young and you ask for advice for someone who's older, they speak slowly to you and they explain that, you know, everything's going to be all right, and you're going through a cycle. And it's this bird's eye view, it's this perspective that the more and more you can differentiate yourself from the noise, the easier it is to get the signal.
Even in those dark moments, you still have to keep your team going. So how do you cope with that?
So that is actually the most important question of all, because those are the people that I have a real loyalty to, all right? I really like Energy. I love my clients. My suppliers I get along really well with. But I have this feeling of debt and gratitude towards my team, which is unparalleled. It's just a different dimension of responsibility over them. So I've come to a point where they know how much it means to them, and I have made many, many decisions to safeguard them and to put them above everyone else, including myself. But I also have to come to terms, and this is something that I've been doing, which is I've done my best, and their lives and their careers are already highly valued by what has happened. This wasn't always the case, right? So when we're like 6 months in, or a year and a half in, these guys are getting paid miserably. They have really not much to put on their CVs. They haven't taken a product to market. They don't have something that works, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay salaries in 6 months. So they are, on the days that I don't feel like getting out of bed, they are the reason why I do. And usually when I get into the office and I see them and someone cracks a joke, it's back into game on, right? So it's two-way. I feel the weight, but they also are the main source of my energy and my motivation. Did I answer your question?
Perfect. I just wanted to say thank you, because like normally people see this entrepreneurship journey as this fairy tale that you mentioned, and like rarely someone comes up and says that it's actually tough. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
No, it is. And some companies are very lucky. Some companies, but they're very, very, very few. And because people also like to sell the dream, and they want you to join their company usually, and they need to project this sense of strength. But I also believe that a sense of strength is not overlooking the adversity, right? I mean, that's where the real lessons come from, right? There are a bunch of quotes that you can say, like, successes are easy to digest and to move on, and easy to not analyze why they were successes. So if you're going from victory to victory, it's easy. You just let yourself go. But defeats and the struggles are where you actually have to go through the inertia of asking the difficult questions.
So as a 5-year-old, you almost have no capacity limit of downloading information and then processing, right? So you said, of course, there's one biological factor which limits later on, like how much you can absorb throughout the day. So how many challenges you can actually face throughout the day in order to solve them and process them accordingly. That's correct. And then we have an environment which is competing for our attention, as you said, right? So there are mobile phones, there are companies, there's like marketing, there's everything. And then there's one big question, it's like the personal and the professional, it's also competing with another about the time you can actually invest in both of them. So to how much are you actually capable to really focus on like building a company while maintaining a healthy private life as well, right? I mean, it's a very tough question, I think.
Yeah, but it's very prominent for me as well. So like I told you, it's been a really big roller coaster. And now, like I said, we got this funding, so we actually have 2 years of funding ahead. Like we've never been able to plan things for 2 years and know we're going to be here in 2 years. It's been much more on a monthly basis, right? So why is that important? Because I made a decision that I would make ProDrone priority number one, right? So I took it with me everywhere. This year I had 1 week of holidays, and in that week we had a little crisis. So like my mind wasn't on holiday. So I was cool with that. But I've made a decision now that this isn't sustainable either, right? I mean, I value my time as well. Like I've really enjoyed Prodrone. I want to keep working on it. But if it becomes incompatible with me living the life and spending the time how I also wanted besides Prodrone, whether it be with girlfriends, family, traveling, then it's not worth it. The balance is off, right? I need to nurture myself as well. So I've set myself the goal of trying to figure that out over the next 2 years. Right? Because one of the problems that I have is not being able, this attention thing that I was telling you about, me going home and worrying about how the day went or becoming anxious about the next day does not solve the decisions that I've made or make the next day work out better. So I'm trying to find a way to have switches in my life, right? But if I get in my car, in my case my motorbike, and I go to work, like I have 15 minutes on my motorbike to switch into chill out and maybe go to the gym or drink a bottle of wine, whatever, Andre, right? And I don't want these two forces of the past and the future to be influencing that because they're not helping me move forward. And I think very successful people are able to do that unless they're completely maniacal, but that's a different way of living life.
Yeah, so you mentioned the imposter syndrome, and I could imagine that a lot of people can relate to it as students like him. So did you find a specific method that worked for you to getting over that?
Yeah, screw it. That is literally screw it. Like, the people believe what they want to believe. The people bet on what they want to bet. As long as I'm playing the game, and playing the game means if you have a startup, you overpromise. And people, if they know what they're doing, they listen to what you say and they take the 30% discount off, right? That's what you do. That's what you do on a date, on a first date, right? You overpromise. You're not. Right? But someone who's smart, you know that's how the game is played. So it's a lot about shedding the feeling of over-responsibility. Someone will come and work for your company if they want to come and work for your company. Just be honest, say what it is. But even there, it's weird. Like when you invite someone to come and work for your company, and like you're hoping you're going to get this investment and they're going to have a job in a year, but you don't know at that point. So what do? So I say no. Screw it. Like, be honest, be faithful, and people are responsible for their own decisions too.
Everybody gets imposter syndrome. New job, new degree, new hire, funding round. You all have a moment where you say, should I be here?
I think so, and that's why it's interesting to see how everybody copes with it, to share that.
Yeah. You just got to recognise it for what it is.
Yeah. Sorry. Want to go first? Okay, I go first. My question would be, how do you, well, it doesn't sound good, but how do you treat your employees and how do they look at the company or the team? I'm going to explain a bit more why I'm curious. I'm working at a startup which is 2 years old now, and I'm basically one of four, if not the first employee. And sometimes I have this thing, like comparing the responsibility and the amount of work, even in hours or just focusing, and the salary that I get is pretty much not on the same level. And many of my friends and family say, okay, it's a job. You have to ask for a proper salary and work compared to that one. But well, I don't know what to do in this case. So the thing is, like, I'm trying to take off as much responsibility of our managing director or CEO, or how do you call it, as much as I can to be more effective, because he's micromanaging too much. But in the other sense, I'm not sure if I should do that or not, and work also late evening or until the morning when there's a presentation next day or we have to show the product, because I feel responsible. If I make mistakes, then I'm not gonna sell the product, we will not have money and stuff. Or just take it as a 9 to 5 or something. I don't know if you get it, but
So this is tough. This is tough. This is tough.
I'm an employee. I'm not an owner. Nothing.
Okay, so this is tough. So there are actually perhaps some parallels between that and my friend that I eventually had to fire this year.
Okay.
And this no, and this is true. Why? Because, and I'm partly responsible for the situation. All right. But he's also partly responsible for it. Essentially, what you need in your life and what he has the obligation to provide you with is clarity. What are you? What are your perspectives? And you have to come to peace with A, this is what he's proposing to me, maybe equity vested in 2 years, or maybe that won't even happen, or I'm just in it for the ride and I'll move on later. But whatever he says to you, if you're going to stay, you have to be comfortable with that. And you not only have to be comfortable with that, you have to be comfortable with a big chunk of uncertainty over what he's just told you. If you're not comfortable with that, go find a more stable job, because then it's very clear what your perspectives are. The problem is the mismatch, and was the case here was a mismatch between expectations.
Yeah.
So the communication wasn't clear. And so when it came time to make a decision, in my case was about equity distribution for my initial employees, his expectations of what he thought was reasonable and what I thought was reasonable were off, right? So what I would encourage you is to seek clarity of what their proposal is. And so I suppose you trust them if you're working there. So he's going to be in my position and he's going to give you the best picture with what he knows at the time. And he'll give you a nice chunk of 30% oversell because he might believe it and he values you and he wants you to stay. And maybe he doesn't have the money to give you a salary, so he'll be very happy if you're there based on a future outcome. But you have to realize that none of that might happen. And you have to be okay with that if that's the case, because you've put yourself in a situation of risk. So, you know, it's your call. It's not his, it's your call. It's his call to sell and to keep you as long as possible and motivated and working hard. It's your job to realize that, you know, it might work, might not. I usually do a lot of the parallel to, it's convenient for me because I'm Portuguese, but we used to put people on boats and send them out expecting that there's going to be a continent on the other side of this ocean. But there might not be, or they might fall off a plate, right? They didn't know. And so imagine one of the sailors, you're one of the sailors on the boat. And the guy's saying, look, we're going to go there, we're going to get a bunch of spices, build a little fort, come back, be rich. And you got to realize you might not come back. You're not going to die in this case, but you might not get what you expect. But it takes a special kind of person to want to be part of this journey. Like, you know, 40 people got on these boats. Lisbon had 200,000. It's not for everyone. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
And then one more question.
Okay, I kind of like a comment question. When you talk about living in the present, it seems that also reflecting on the past and particularly learning from our past is really important for the present. And planning for the future is also really important for our present. And that sometimes requires some sacrifices in the present, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. So when you talk about living in the present, like, do you mean, I envision it as acting in the present, but having this reflection on both the past and the future, but just making sure you don't hold on to that because it doesn't exist anymore. It's just something you can.
Absolutely. So there's a huge distinction between being able to take lessons or carrying it with you, right? One thing is to, you get beaten up in a certain neighborhood. Are you going to be frightened of every time you cross someone on the street? Or are you going to go like, maybe I should, take karate classes? Do you know what I mean? It's one thing. One thing is to say, I like to eventually have a house. Another thing is to worry today whether you're actually going to save up enough to give into the house and let that affect the quality of your life now. That is the distinction. It's got nothing to do about reflections on the past or planning for the future. Does that make clear?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm an entrepreneur myself. We've got a pretty big team as well, and I can recognize a lot of what you're saying. I think there's one thing that's really unclear, and that I personally think is very annoying. Which is on one hand, you're saying that there has to be expectations. People always have expectations. There has to be clarity in those expectations, and I think the parallel to going on a date and overselling yourself is a good parallel. But in the longer run, with a girlfriend, you can't keep overselling things 30% all the time. At one point, you need to have clear expectations all the time. Do you see it sort of any sort of future where in entrepreneurship people could just bullshit a bit less? Like, could we go away from that 30% overselling where everyone knows that everyone else is overselling at 30%? Like, if someone comes and actually tells the truth, you're disadvantaged because everyone else is bullshitting. Does it have to be like that?
No, it doesn't, and it doesn't stay that way, right? It doesn't stay that way. You don't stay a startup forever. The whole idea is that your company matures and that you become much more confident in what you project into the person. So you've either built a company where you, let's say 5 or 6 years down the road, where it's, you're now offering a job. You're not really hiring someone to become an entrepreneur with you, right? So you go to India back and forth a few times. From time to time you might lose a ship, but you can go like, we're 90% successful coming back and forth, and most of my guys became rich or did really good going back and forth. So do you want to join, this transatlantic company? It's not the same spirit. It's not the same risk. If you cannot grow into that, then there's a problem, right? Your company has not matured beyond it,
But can we get immature companies to go away from it as well?
Can you say what?
Can we get immature companies to go away from it as well?
Oh, the oversell? Why do you oversell? Because you don't have much more to do, right? I can't say, look, don't worry, you're going to get a car, you're going to get benefits, you're going to have health insurance, you're going to have this, this, and this. Because you're competing in the marketplace.
Right, so you're bullshitting because everyone else is bullshitting.
Because you're selling a dream. Because that dream, you need to believe it. There is a chance it comes true. And you will attract people who are attracted to that mission, right? Not everyone will buy it. People who are conservative-minded, they'll go like, I can't really sink my teeth into this. Screw it. But those are usually people that you don't want in your company anyway. So you want people who are excited about the possibilities of what might happen. If you're a big utility, you're an RWE or an E.ON, look, you're not selling anyone a dream. You're selling someone a decent job, perhaps interesting, a bunch of perks, and you'll be here in 20 years. Thank you.